Now, the small Protestant church in Bulgaria is largely dispensationalist in its eschatology. That means that they don't see any future for the church in history. The future is all in the eternal state of the saints. In general, the society is right now almost completely ravaged by pessimism about the future. With Bulgaria joined the European Union, but the European Union is obviously disintegrating, and there is no hope anywhere left. People just don't look at the future as something that will bring good things, as opposed to what it was 5 years ago when the European Union was full of optimism and it was the pinnacle of history, so to speak. But future is important to everybody. Everybody needs to know what's coming in the future. What's the Reformed view of the future? The truly biblical Reformed view of the future that Bulgarians need to know, and why it is important.
Throughout the history of the church, the two rival views in the West, one was premillennial, which said that there's no permanent progress until Jesus physically returns to set up a kingdom. The other view was amillennialism, which said there really will not be any significant, long-lasting progress of society. Yes, you can have progress in theology, and they all believe that. And I suspect even in Eastern Christianity, theologians think, well, there'll be progress. Theologically, things will get clearer. What was not believed is that things would get better as they became clearer theologically. That the theological advancement that society would have over the years would be beneficial to the church and maybe beneficial to the family, but there would be no long-lasting repercussions within the general social order. And so in the West we had Augustine's position of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of man. And he saw progress for the kingdom of God, but he thought that the kingdom of man would come and go. They'd rise, they'd fall, there would be triumph, there would be defeat, there would be no cumulative progress. Beginning around 1600 in Protestant Netherlands and extending to Protestant Scotland, a new idea began to be argued. And that idea is that God will bless the general society as he blesses the church for faithfulness. And that as the gospel goes out and people accept it and to begin to correspond their lives in relationship to the Bible, that there would be correspondence between biblical law and the obedience of Christians, and as the gospel would go to more and more people, that society would be changed for the better, that the benefits of society would not be confined to the institutional church and the institutional family, but that it would go to business, it would go into scientific investigation, it would go to technological improvement, it would go to greater freedom in terms of politics. In other words, wherever satanic power had exercised dominion for generations, the gospel would heal that. And that was one meaning of salvation, like a salve, as we would put it, something you put on a burn to heal it. Salvation was not just personal. Salvation, healing, is social. And it affects every area of life in which the old satanic man had been dominant before. As satanic man is replaced by dominion man, Christian covenant-keeping dominion man, society will improve. Now that began to change the faith of Western Europeans. And by the middle of the 18th century, humanists began to pick up the idea of progress, the idea of the doctrine of progress. They secularized it. They made it the basis of the kingdom of man instead of the kingdom of God. But they picked up on the idea of progress. And that idea is still widely held in the West. and it led to economic growth. It led to an extension of constitutional principles, limitation of tyrannical government. It led to all areas of society as the optimism regarding the progress in history was extended through society. Men would commit capital and labor on the assumption that they could get richer and society could get richer, and it would not simply collapse in some kind of devastating blow-up at the end of the road. It wouldn't simply become another cycle of progress and defeat, but that you could have permanent progress over a long period of time. And we've seen that. Beginning around 1800 in the West, we began to see about 2% per annum increase of per capita wealth. And you can't perceive 2% per year. But over 2 centuries you surely can. And we have transformed our society beyond what could ever have been dreamed of 200 years ago. And the reason for that is the doctrine of progress became widely believed in the West, and now it has spread. Now, communism was part of this. The Marxist vision was a doctrine of progress, and it was a doctrine of economic progress. It just was not covenantal in the sense of it was not under the God of the Bible as the source of the progress. But communism's power to change people's minds around the world was based, I believe, more on the doctrine of progress than on anything else in communism. They believed that the forces of history were granting enormous power to the vanguard of the proletariat. And that idea, that enormous confidence that they were the representatives of history, led them to make the sacrifices that were necessary to change the world. Now, when that faith began to crack, probably in the 1960s and 70s, then communism began a downhill move and ultimately disintegrated because confidence in the future failed. But when they had that confidence, they were a powerful force. The Christians should understand that God does not throw us into the lion's den like a bunch of Daniels to leave us in the lion's den. We're there briefly, then we are removed, and the enemies of God wind up in the lion's den. Completely different view of Daniel from what you're going to find in a lot of the preaching of modern Protestantism. Yeah, you go in the lion's den once in a while, and people are chewed up. The early Christians literally were chewed up by the animals. But the confidence that they had on the future ultimately led within 3 centuries to the triumph of the church over all of the old Roman Empire. It was optimism, at least short-term optimism, that changed their minds. We have to see an extension of that same kind of optimism, because if you don't have that optimism, you won't sacrifice sufficiently your present lifestyle for the sake of your future lifestyle. You have to save for the future. That's the problem, the huge problem of the West today. There's no thrift. The thrift has disappeared because confidence in the future is disappearing. And that will have significant negative consequences, and we're certainly, I believe that's what we're seeing both in the United States and in the common market. Thrift has disappeared, confidence about the future is disappearing, and so economic growth is going to slow.